Hello everyone, welcome if you're just joining us now. Just going to give everyone a couple of minutes to log on and get comfortable, and then I'll do some introductions. In the meantime, do feel free to say hello in the chat, let us know where you're joining from. Make sure if you are typing in the chat to change your to box so that it says everyone and not just hosts and panelists, so that we can all see your messages. Lovely to see so many of you already typing. Lots of people from Germany, welcome. Madrid. Lithuania, Ukraine. An amazing mix of countries. Lovely to see so many of you here. Thank you for giving up your afternoon or evening to come and spend an hour with us. Hello, Chia. Okay, we are on pretty much bang on 4 o'clock UK time. So I'm just going to start with my introductions, as I want us to have the maximum amount of time available for our session. So hello again and welcome to today's webinar, a global communication toolkit, 3 assets every learner needs, with Lewis Lansford. This is the 4th webinar in our Voices webinar series for 2022. So welcome back if you've joined us for any others, and welcome if you're joining us for the first time. My name's Lucy, and I work on the NGL marketing team, coming to you from a slightly chilly UK. We're very pleased you could join us online today, and hopefully maybe at some in-person events as well moving forward, but very grateful that you're joining us on Zoom. Before I introduce our speaker today, I'd just like to take a minute to go over some of the functionality of the platform, although I'm sure you're all very aware of it. You'll see the icons at the bottom of your screen. As I'm sure most of you have already found the chat function. We'd love this to be an interactive event, so please do use this to interact with the presenter and other attendees. As I said, make sure you're sending your message to everyone rather than just hosts and panelists, to ensure the whole group can read your message, unless you would like to obviously send a message to myself or to Lewis privately. Just as a reminder, please do keep the chat focused on today's session. You'll also see at the bottom a Q&A button. If you do have any very specific questions to ask either us, myself or Lewis, please pop them in there, because sometimes they do get a bit lost in the chat. We'll do our best to answer questions, but we will have hopefully some allocated time at the end to answer as many questions as possible. Please do keep, if you do have any product questions, please do keep them focused on voices, as obviously that's kind of one of the focuses of today's session. If you do have any other questions, pop them into the Q&A and I'll try and follow up with you afterwards. As I said, and we have allocated some time at the end to go through questions. In terms of follow-up, Zoom will send out an email tomorrow with a link to the certificate and today's recording, and also a lesson plan. We will also send another email with all of this same information, so don't worry if you missed the email from Zoom. We will send a message from ourselves as well. So I'd just like to spend a couple of minutes introducing today's speaker. I'm sure some of you have already attended webinars with Lewis before, but Lewis is a freelance editor, project manager and writer. He has worked on books, videos, tests, apps and online materials for English learners of all ages across the world. More recently, he is part of the author team for National Geographic Learning's new general English series for adults, Voices. Lewis, I'll pass over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Is my mic on? I'm not muted or anything like that? Lucy, I assume you would tell me if I were speaking into the abyss.
Loud and clear.
Good, excellent. Okay, great. So welcome everyone. It is such a privilege to welcome people from all over the world into my modest office, where I spend most of my days completely alone. So welcome. As advertised, our topic today is a global communication toolkit, three assets every learner needs. So we're going to talk about, well, in fact, let's start with this question. This is a great little exercise if you want to revise countable and non-countable nouns, right? There's an exercise that's similar to this in Voices Elementary. So I'd like you in the chat box just to name 2 or 3 things that you carry with you every day. I mean, just real life stuff like your phone, stuff like that. Just to get us focused on the idea of tools or assets or things that we really miss if we were without them. So I'm adding my own list here: phone, ID, money, lipstick. I don't carry, but many people do. We all carry a mask these days, less so in the UK now, but masks have become part of something that was in our everyday carry. A water bottle, many people carry every day. A notebook. I try to carry a notebook to just keep track of the list of things I have to do. Diary, yeah, pen. I'm looking over here at my my chat window is over here. So these are things that we just automatically carry with us every day because they're incredibly useful. And if we didn't have them with us, we would really miss them. I would like to use these things as sort of a metaphor for what I'm calling the global communication toolkit. And these are assets or things that learners should carry with them every day, or learners can use every day as they move in the world of English. And here we go. The first part of the webinar, I'll talk about authentic listening skills. I think everybody probably has some idea of what I mean by that, but we'll kind of precisely define what I mean by that or demonstrate it and discuss why that is the first skill or asset in my global communication toolkit. The second one is a clear voice, which is almost kind of a poetic way of describing what I mean. I'll have to explain that one a little bit more, but we'll talk about what learners need to, the qualities learners need to have to communicate clearly, to speak clearly, we could say. And then the third one, the third tool or asset or area of skills is what I call cultural agility. So we'll unpack that. So that's the outline for the next 50 minutes, and we'll jump right in with authentic listening skills. And I'd like to start with a question again for the chat box. Among the 4 skills of speaking, listening, reading, and writing, it's often said that listening is the most difficult. Learners of any language often say that it's the listening that really is the huge challenge. So in the chat box, give me some ideas about what makes listening hard. Yeah, unfamiliar accents, different voices, people with high voices, low voices, deep voices. Yeah, it's fleeting. People might use unknown words or grammar. Sometimes we can't tell what someone's attitude is when they're speaking. Are they being sarcastic? Are they making fun of me? Is this a joke? Somebody wrote fleeting in the chat box, and that's the impossibility of re-listening. Often in the real world, you don't get a second chance. Speed. Sometimes people just speak so quickly, or it seems that way when we're a language learner. Emotion sometimes plays a role. We don't really know how people feel, or emotion can confuse what we think we're actually hearing. So the point is that in listening, there are a huge number of variables. When you do reading, it's very easy to go back and reread. You can use your dictionary. There's text on the page. It might be black text on a white background or white text on a black background, but there aren't that many variables, not the same as with listening. And when you speak, you can choose your words carefully. You can try to use words that you know, and you can also say, oh, I don't remember the word. So you can, you've got a lot more control when you're writing or you're speaking. But with listening, it often just feels completely out of control. So what I'd like to do is just start by looking at a simple sentence in English. And I hope your audio is, well, obviously it's turned on because you're hearing my voice. So I hope my audio is turned on. I'd like to look at this simple sentence, did you see her again?
Did you see her again?
And that's what it sounds like. And if you look in the dictionary, you'll see that the words in the dictionary, the pronunciation gives exactly this as the pronunciation for those words. Did you see her again? That's what we call the citation pronunciation, because it's the one that's in the dictionary. But what makes listening challenging is that we might also hear this.
Did you see her again?
Did you see her again? So the did you becomes did ya. And that's called the spoken sound shape. So we've got these two different things going on with pronunciation. We've got the way that we teach learners to say it, and then we've got the way that it is actually often said. But it gets even more interesting because we might also hear you see her again, or did you see her again, or did you see her again, or you see her again. So with this simple 5 words, there are at least 5 and probably a lot more different ways of saying it. And that's what learners have to contend with. And it's tough. So the implication of that is that we need to teach learners pronunciation for listening. We've got essentially 2 different reasons for teaching pronunciation. One is to teach learners how to articulate themselves and how to speak clearly. And in that case, the citation pronunciation is really useful. But we also need to teach them something about phonology that they hear. So for starters, to teach pronunciation for listening, we need to sensitize students to the facts. And that is simply a matter of pointing out to learners that on the one hand, you have the pronunciation that I, as your teacher, am teaching you to say, but on the other hand, there's what you're going to hear. And we get this a lot with wanna and gonna and have to. I think we're very good at sensitizing learners to those because they're so very common. But in my opinion, it's not necessary to teach students to say gonna and have to and wanna. The important thing is that they know that wanna is want to. So of course, in the classroom, we want to discuss it. We want to point out to students, in fact, exactly how pronunciation changes. And I'm going to give you an example of this shortly. And we need to give learners plenty of examples. So when we're teaching pronunciation or phonology for listening, we're going through these 4 steps. A classic example is, did you? What did you do? So the citation pronunciation would be, what did you do? But what learners might hear is, what'd you do? What'd you do? Which doesn't sound at all like, what did you do? And yet it's super common. So I'm saying we should teach this. What does this look like? In voices, one way we go into this is just to simply get learners to listen to different types of pronunciation. And here we have side by side both the citation pronunciation and more of a spoken sound shape pronunciation. So it sounds like this.
1. A. How did you learn to skate? B. How did you learn to skate? 2. A. Did you see her again? B. Did you see her again? 3. A. How often do you see her now? B. How often do you see her now? 4. A. Do you still go ice skating every Saturday? B. Do you still go ice skating every Saturday?
Okay, so what we're doing in an exercise like that is allowing learners to hear both the very clearly articulated simple sentence and also the way the phonology changes. And you can see in this one, we're focusing on did and do. So do you and did you often become Jew and Jew, or yeah, Jew, did ya and Jew, like that. So that's just a brief look at teaching pronunciation for listening. The point is that we teach phonology or English phonology for two different reasons. One is to help learners listen, and one is to help learners speak more clearly. And we'll talk about the latter one in a bit. Another aspect of authentic listening is getting learners to listen for attitude and emotion. Often when we listen, the words that the person is saying don't necessarily match their meaning. Let's take a look at an example. I'm going to give you a simple expression in English. And the expression is, that's great. If you would put in the chat box, what's the meaning? How do you define, how would you explain the meaning of the sentence, that's great? Or when would someone use that sentence? Most obviously, what's the most obvious explanation of why someone would say, yeah, it's overwhelmingly positive, it's wonderful, it's a super idea. So it's super positive. You like something, it's great, you're very happy. And here's a perfect example of that. This is an Olympian named Fu Yuanhui, and she won a bronze medal in Rio in 2016 in the backstroke. And she was super happy about that. You can see that she's holding up her medal and she's saying, bronze, that's great. She's so happy. So she feels super cool. And that is the meaning of that expression. But I give you exhibit B. This is Michaela Maroney, and she won a silver in gymnastics in London in 2012 in the vault. And what's she doing with her medal? She's hiding it. So she's saying silver, well, that's great. And she's unhappy. So she's saying the exact same words, but with a completely different meaning. It's irony, as somebody says, or sarcasm or whatever. So if you just listen to the words, it's not quite enough. You need to listen to the context. You need to listen to the way they're delivered. We need to give learners a heads up that they need to listen not only for the words, but also for the speaker's intention. So I can give you an example of an exercise that does just that. I've got a conversation here between Petra and Matteo, and they're colleagues or something. I think they may even be teachers. So we need to listen to the conversation and complete the sentences and say how we know. So question 1 is, Petra feels bored or happy at the beginning. Question 2, Petra feels bored or happy at the end. And question 3, Matteo knows or he doesn't know how Petra feels. So listen to the words, especially the words that Petra says, and think about the emotion, think about the relationship, think about what's being communicated.
How's life with a new baby in the family?
Yeah, he's great.
Do you have any photos?
I do. Wait. Here's one.
Is this your baby Luca? Oh, that's great. And who's that woman with the red scarf?
That's my grandmother. She's 85 years old.
Really? That's your grandmother. She looks so young.
And look, here's another photo of Luca. He's in a baseball cap.
And who are these people?
The one with glasses is my best friend, Hervé, from Paris. Those girls are his children.
That's nice.
Here's another one. Luca is in pink tights. So cute.
Yeah, that's great. He's very cute.
And this photo, he's with my cousin Luana. She's in that green jumper.
That's great. I have a class.
Oh, and I just love this one. Look. This is my colleague Marta. She gave Luca these baby gloves. Look at these gloves.
Wow, nice. But I need to go.
Oh, one more photo. Look at Luca in the socks.
Bye, Matteo. I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, so in the chat box, how does Petra feel at the beginning of the conversation? Exactly. She's happy at the beginning. She's excited about the photo. She says, oh, that's great. But by the end, how is she feeling at the end of the conversation? Yeah, she's curious at the beginning, bored at the end. And she says the same words, right? She says, oh, that's great. By the end, she's saying, oh, yeah, that's great, but I have to go. And what about Matteo? What's your impression? Does he know how Petra feels? Does he understand Petra's reaction to him? No. And we can tell because he continues to be enthusiastic while she continues to, while she becomes more and more bored. So the lesson for our learners there is that it's not just the words that are part of listening. We're also listening for attitude and demeanor and just the context of what's going on there. So that's my second tip for teaching authentic listening, is listen for attitude and emotion. So we look at pronunciation for listening, wanna, gonna, have to, and all that. That's what I talked about first. Then we listen for attitude and emotion. And the third authentic listening skill that I'd like to discuss is actively engaging with accents. So in most situations in real life, English speakers will encounter a wide variety of accents: Chinese, English, German English, Peruvian English, and of course, American, British, New Zealand, South African, and so on. We can view accents, especially the second language accents, as a problem, or we can engage with it in a constructive way and get learners to notice different accents and think about what the features of different accents are and how to engage with them. Often, this is really just a simple matter of getting learners to notice accents and to pay attention to which accents are easy for them to understand, which ones are more difficult, and what the features of different accents are, but also to actively engage with their own accent, their own way of speaking. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later when I talk about a clear voice. But I think the crucial thing for me is to engage with accents as features of the way people communicate, rather than as flaws or as mistakes people make. That if someone is a German, if their first language is German and they speak English with a German accent, they are not failing to achieve a native-like British or American accent. They're just a German person whose English is spoken with a German accent, which says something about their identity. So we want to engage with that. A simple way that we do that in voices is just this little exercise. Listen to the sentence below, said in 4 different accents. Can you hear the differences? Which is most similar to your accent?
1. The place where I feel inspired is the lake near my house.
2. The place where I feel inspired is the lake near my house.
3.
The place where I feel inspired is the lake near my house.
4.
The place where I feel inspired is the lake near my house.
Okay, so a simple enough accent, but a simple enough exercise, but all we're doing is just asking learners to look in this direction, almost in kind of a neutral way, to look at accent as a feature of the way people speak. And people with English as their first language have a certain accent. I have an American accent. The people who live around me in New York, many of them have a Northern English accent. The world is full of a huge variety of accents, and we want to engage with these as positive features of the way people communicate. If you're interested in exploring these ideas in more detail, I picked up, in fact, the information about spoken sound shape and citation that I mentioned at the beginning of this section came from Phonology for Listening. This was nominated for an Elton's Award in 2014, so it's not completely new, but I found it super interesting. So that's something, if you really want to follow up on Phonology for Listening, that is one of several possible ways that you could do that. So that's a recommendation. I'm going to pause here briefly. Rachel, it seems like are there problems with people hearing?
Lewis, I think it's okay. I think it was just one attendee was having some problems, but
Okay.
rejoined, so I think we're good.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. So that's not for me. Thank you. All right, just wanted to be sure. All right. Okay, so to sum up authentic listening skills, we want to study pronunciation for listening, not just for speaking. We want to encourage learners and give learners practice with listening for attitude and emotion. And we want to actively engage with the accents that learners will hear in the real world. Part 2, a clear voice. I think we have some idea when we say someone has a clear voice, what that means, but let's look at it specifically. Again, in the chat box, please. What makes a speaker easy to understand? What are the qualities of a communicator who is easy to understand specifically? Good word choice. Speed, again, that came up with difficulty. Animation, good articulation. Yep, intonation. These are things that I'm coming up with as well. Clear pronunciation, often speaking with a certain rhythm, particularly in English, which is a stress-timed language. Stress supports the meaning. Pace isn't too fast. Successful communicators adjust their speech to the audience. They might use gestures. I like to use gestures when I speak. You go from A to B. That can help clarify. When you get to a higher level in English, you may be very proud of the fact that you know all kinds of complicated idioms and expressions that native speakers use or whatever. But in fact, keeping your communication not too complex actually makes you easier to understand. Rephrasing from time to time, humor is a good one. Yet all of these things coming up in the chat box. Great, thank you. So how do we cultivate a clear voice? And this will sort of start to define what I mean by a clear voice. At National Geographic Learning, we talk a lot about making English your own, owning your English. Thinking of English not as something that belongs to the world outside, something we're borrowing from the British or from the Americans or whatever, but that English is something that is part of who you are and something that you use to move in the world as yourself, right? It's not an identity that you're taking on from outside. It's something that becomes you. Well, that's a bit vague. Let's look at an example of how we might teach that. Here's an example from Voices about tips for making English your own. So rather than read it out loud, I'll just give you a chance to read through it on the screen. Okay, so what we can notice about each of these sentences is that it has you or your in the middle of the sentence. So we're really getting learners to think about what is it about English that is their very own. And one point here I particularly like is point 4 about bringing your language and culture into English. So rather than thinking of my first language and culture is one thing, and the English language is some other foreign thing that has its completely different culture, what we find is that successful communicators sort of integrate English into their own culture and use English as a way to express their own culture. We'll talk a little bit more about culture later on in the talk. So here's an exercise that we have in Voices. 3 simple questions. How do you like to learn English? For you, what is a mistake in English? If you want to answer any of these questions, you can put answers in the chat box if you like. And when do you feel good about speaking English? So we're focusing on the positives. I also like this idea of getting learners to think about what a mistake is in English. Is it a mistake if you have an accent? If you fail to speak just like the British person on the recording you're listening to? In my opinion, that's not a mistake. If your pronunciation is in such a way that people don't understand what you're saying, that no one understands you, that is a mistake. So we need to get learners thinking about these things, and also thinking about how they like to learn English. I've got someone, Pia here, is saying reading, watching movies, talking. So these are things outside of English class that could be very positive experiences. So that's just some ideas about owning English and how we encourage learners to take full ownership of English as something that belongs to them. Perhaps on a more, we could say, practical level for English teachers, we're looking at pronunciation now. We want to look at knowing what makes you intelligible. What features of speech make you easy to understand? So here's some examples of things that we often see taught in English classes. Weak forms. An example would be the word there in "is there a problem?" versus "look over there." Over there is the strong form of the word there, and the weak form is there a problem? It depends on its function in the sentence. TH sounds get worked on a lot in English because English has more THs than any other language in the universe. And we get things like tink and think and dink and think and all these different ways of saying TH that are not the usual first language user way of saying TH, or what people think of as that. We also have spent a lot of time working on intonation. So at the end of a sentence, do you drive a Subaru? We teach learners that questions of a certain kind go up at the end and other questions go down at the end, and we tie ourselves in knots sometimes trying to teach intonation. But what the research shows us is that certain things that we've traditionally taught in pronunciation syllabuses are actually low priority. It's not wrong to teach them, but they don't make you easier to understand. And what research shows us is that, in fact, there are some things that do make learners easier to, or speakers easier to understand. Vowel length. So the words slip, I slipped and fell, versus sleep, I sleep every night. Slip, sleep, slip, sleep. That is a crucial feature that makes it easier for people to understand you. Did you slip? Did you sleep? But also in words like eyes that you see with, and ice, as in a drink, the cold thing. Eyes with the voice sound at the end has a longer vowel than ice, which has a voiceless consonant at the end. So the vowel is exactly the same, but it's longer in certain contexts. Another one, consonant clusters, like the word advice or grandchild or watch. Getting consonant clusters clearly articulated is important to having people understand you. And I'm going to look at an example of that in just a second that I think you'll find interesting. The third one that is also research-based is that nuclear stress is hugely important for being understood. And that is which words are stressed in a sentence. So when you want to emphasize something, you put the nuclear stress on that word. So those are all high priority. And these are things that we want to include in a pronunciation syllabus. And that is now what is called the ELF, or English as a Lingua Franca syllabus, the syllabus that's modeled, that's based on what makes people easy to understand rather than how any first language user might speak. So I mentioned I'd give you an example. When we say the word advice, a lot of times we find that to deal with that DV consonant cluster, speakers will drop one of the consonants. And so they might say a vice without the D. Can you give me I need a vice. And that could sound like a completely different word. So a hack for helping learners say consonant clusters is to get them to fully value both consonants, but throw a little vowel in the middle. So for advice, we might say a device. And you can see I stopped on the D, a little vowel sound, and then said the V. When you say it, it might feel a little bit unnatural, but actually to the listener, they may not even notice. What they'll hear is the word clearly articulated. So breaking up consonant clusters with a vowel is a top ELF pronunciation hack. A device. Okay, racing along. We want learners to own their English. We want learners to know pronunciation-wise what makes them intelligible, what makes them easy to understand. The third clear voice feature that I'd like to talk about is the ability to accommodate. And somebody mentioned that earlier. Accommodation is the ability to adapt your speech to your audience. So if a doctor is speaking to other doctors, he can use a lot of high-level medical terms and be very technical. If a doctor is speaking to a patient, then the doctor needs to accommodate his language to explain what he or she is talking about in simpler terms. We can teach this. A communication skill from voices is adapting your English to be understood. So simplify your language. This doesn't mean talking baby talk or talking to people like you think they're stupid. It just means being aware of not using super complex idioms, complicated structures, long sentences, especially if you know that your audience is a group of A2 or B1 level English speakers. We want to encourage learners to speak slowly and clearly, using fewer words or using the minimum number of words. Accommodation also includes listening. Accommodation is about a relationship between the speaker and the listener. So when speaking, part of accommodation can be to stop speaking, right? When you're listening to someone, you want to give them a chance to express themselves so that you can carry on with the communication. So listen to the listener. My colleague Chia gave an entire webinar a couple of months ago about mediation. And this is when you recognize problems. One thing about mediation is when you recognize problems of understanding between other people. So as a strong communicator, if you notice that the person over here has misunderstood the person over here, you might be able to step in and translate or simplify. And that translate could be all in the same language, from complex English to a simpler kind of English or something like that. Another final one for accommodation is adapt to other languages. If you speak other languages, you may be able to switch to another language the other person knows to explain or translate a word. When I started teaching many, many years ago, the mantra was that you should always keep it in English, always keep it in English, make your students speak English, keep it in English. What research shows now is that the best communicators, especially in multilingual groups, are people who move between languages. If you come up against a communication problem in English, if you can throw out the word in another language that other people know, or you say, oh, I don't remember the word, it's cenicero in Spanish. Oh yeah, ashtray, yeah. Or, you know, even saying an entire phrase in another language, that kind of flexibility and agility actually contributes to communication. And the goal is not to speak every word in English. The goal is for communication to flow. Okay, another book recommendation if you're interested in following up any of these ideas. Our colleague, another author on the Voices team, is Marek Kiczkowiak. And with his colleague, Robert Lowe, they wrote a book called Teaching English as a Lingua Franca, the journey from EFL to ELF. And that talks about the English as a Lingua Franca pronunciation syllabus and a lot of other issues around communication in these groups of mixed L1, mixed nationality situations. And so I highly recommend that book. And Marek and his insight, especially into pronunciation, was a great asset on the Voices project. Okay, so to sum up, the second tool in the toolkit, a clear voice, we want to encourage learners to own their English, see it as something that belongs to themselves and is part of their identity rather than something separate from their identity. We want to, on a practical level, help learners understand which sounds really matter when they're speaking. It's not about copying a British person or copying an American person or an Australian person. It's about speaking clearly. And then the third part of having a clear voice is the ability to accommodate, to change your voice, you could say, depending on who you're talking to. All right, on to part 3, cultural agility. I love this picture from Voices. This guy is some kind of break dancer, I think in Korea, and I wish I could do that. I'd like to start this section with a quiz. So get ready in the chat box. Here is a culture quiz. How are these two things connected? Answers in the chat box, please. What's the connection between these two items? Okay, this is almost an age test. So for my generation, as I see a lot of people here know, before you put a cassette in your cassette deck, you need to tighten the tape, because if you don't, the tape machine may damage the tape. So you take the pencil, put it in the cassette hole, and tighten the tape. Everyone in my generation knows that. You look at that and you see the obvious connection there. My kids would have no idea, because they don't use cassettes, they use MP3s. And anyone who's below a certain age never did this. Okay, so why is this a culture quiz? Because we normally think of culture as, bowing in Japan and shaking hands in much of the West, and the types of food people eat and various cultural taboos and so on. So why is this culture? Well, in this case, we're talking about the culture of a generation. And so by culture, I don't just mean festivals and food and the things we think of with national cultures when we're talking about language, but we're just talking about the way a group of people do things, or shared knowledge of a group of people. So the culture of our age group, my generation, includes what you do with a pencil and a cassette tape. But we can also, of course, have the culture of a nation, and that's super important when we're talking about language teaching. But we can also talk about the culture of an office. Things are done a certain way. People have a certain attitude. People have certain beliefs and assumptions. A family can have a culture. An occupation can have a culture. Doctors may move in the world in a certain way and have a shared knowledge. If a doctor meets another doctor, they have some kind of shared understanding because of their shared culture. Or a special interest. If a rock climber meets another rock climber, they may feel instantly at home. There's some kind of rapport there. The culture of a team or any other group. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about culture, not just American culture versus British culture versus Chinese culture. We're talking about culture of any group and how that affects communication. But let's look at an example now. And in fact, this one, as it happens, is about national culture. This is a conversation in a spread written by my colleague Chia called Dealing with Unexpected Behaviors. And this is in Voices Intermediate. And it's a conversation between a Dutch guy named Peter and a British guy called Lee. And as you listen to the conversation, just think about what's going on, how both participants feel, and whether there might be some kind of cultural situation there, something going on culturally that might be leading to some kind of misunderstanding. Here we go.
So, Peter, where are you from?
I'm from Haarlem, in the Netherlands.
I've been to the Netherlands. Do you live there with your family?
Yes, I live with my parents.
Brothers and sisters?
No, I'm an only child.
Girlfriend?
No, no girlfriend at the moment.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a nurse.
That's a good job. You help people.
Yeah, I love my job.
Okay, so any quick observations about how that conversation went? Did they seem to be communicating, or what was the nature of it? Any ideas about how anyone might have felt? All right, let's take a listen now to Peter's reaction to that conversation. Yeah, it was just an interview. That's what it felt like, right? So this is what Peter says about that conversation.
I just met this guy called Lee. He was so weird and kind of aggressive. He stood really close to me and kept asking questions that were too personal. He made me feel really uncomfortable. Why did he want to know so much?
Okay, so exactly as Virginia put in the chat box, it might be perceived that Lee's questions were too personal. And so there was some kind of discomfort there. Let's talk a little about that. This is an image that Chia, who also gave a webinar recently on culture, used in her webinar. And it's such a strong image that I wanted to repeat it here. So you'll have to forgive me if you've seen it twice, but I just think it's super interesting. The cultural iceberg is what we call it. And the part above the water on the iceberg is what we say and do, how we behave in life, with food, behavior. If we're talking about a nation, it's festivals and the arts and food and stuff like that. But just in general, it's our behavior. But what's more interesting, perhaps, is what's below the waterline, the things that people can't see. These are assumptions that we have, beliefs that we hold, experiences that we've had, and preferences that we may feel. And so unless we explicitly say these things, the only way they're expressed is through our behavior. So these are things that are super important to us, but not everyone can see them. And that makes communication kind of a mystery sometimes. Things above the water are visible, things below the water are not visible. So that's the cultural iceberg. And this is a model that we can introduce with learners and with everyone in life, actually, that gets people thinking about what might be going on when communication feels a bit odd. So that is how we begin to explore the role of culture in communication. But to take it one step further, we want to help learners develop interpersonal and intercultural skills that will help them avoid the kind of misunderstanding that Peter and Lee had, or achieve more comfortable communication. What I'm going to show you now is a video that sort of directly addresses Lee and Peter's conversation. And it's a video from Voices, and it's about 2.5 or 3 minutes. And I debated whether to show the whole thing or not, but I think I think you'll find it interesting from beginning to end. So this is from Voices, and one way that we go about teaching some interpersonal skills.
When we see behavior that is unfamiliar or unexpected, it's often easy to interpret this behavior based on how we see things. We can sometimes forget that other people might not do or see things the same way we do. In the conversation between Lee and Peter, Peter felt uncomfortable with Lee's questions. Peter quickly decided that Lee was a bit aggressive. And this is something many people do. When we experience an unexpected or unfamiliar behavior, we immediately evaluate it. But we do this based on our beliefs and what is normal to us. Peter, for example, thinks it isn't normal to ask personal questions about family when you've just met someone. For Peter, asking lots of personal questions is an aggressive thing to do. So Peter evaluates Lee based on what's normal to him. But Peter could consider other interpretations of Lee's behavior before making his evaluation. Imagine you're Peter. You could use the DAE model to help you interpret Lee's behavior. Step 1. Describe. Describe what happened, but without judgment. You could say, Lee asked me many questions about my personal life, instead of, Lee kept asking me questions that were too personal. Step 2. Analyze. Why did they do that? Come up with at least 3 different possible reasons. Maybe Lee is curious about you and wants to know more. Or maybe Lee doesn't like you and wants to make you feel uncomfortable. Or maybe Lee likes you and is trying to show that he's interested in your life. Step 3. Evaluate. How does that make you feel? If you were Peter, How would you feel knowing that Lee is curious about you? Perhaps you might feel pleased, and you would be happy to give Lee more information about yourself. But how would you feel if Lee did this on purpose to make you feel uncomfortable? You might say Lee is aggressive and rude, and you might not want to speak to him again. But what if Lee did this because this is his way of showing interest and making small talk? You might not make small talk in the same way as Lee, but you might appreciate Lee's good intentions and try to find a way to build a friendship with him. By following these steps, we avoid jumping from describe to evaluate too quickly, and instead open up our minds to the possibilities of other interpretations. With practice, we can train ourselves to see that our way of seeing things is just one of many interpretations of reality. We can then learn to hold back our judgments as we learn to see the world through other people's eyes.
Okay, so we can see that that's just a little 3-minute kind of mini lesson about an interpersonal skill that isn't directly related to speaking across languages. We could, or speaking across cultures, national cultures. It could be applied to any interpersonal communication situation, but it obviously has a lot of applications when we're dealing with people from 2 different countries. And it's practical and easy to remember. And Voices is full of fairly specific, easy to digest interpersonal and intercultural skills training lessons like that one. And they're very well put together. The final tip I'd like to give about developing cultural agility is just the giving learners an understanding of the necessity that they have to negotiate a shared culture in many situations. So if we imagine a situation where we've got a Spanish person and a German person and a Polish person working together in one office on some international project, and let's say they're in a 4th country, they're, I don't know, in Saudi Arabia working on an oil project. So we've got 4 cultures represented there. English is the language of communication, and yet there's no, it won't be easy for these people to decide how, for example, someone lower in the hierarchy addresses someone above them in the hierarchy. Do we use first name and last name? How do we express politeness? What's the culture around communication? And the answer is that there isn't really one. We can't say just because they're speaking English that somehow English carries that culture, because they could be speaking American English or British English or Australian English or Indian English or any kind of English. And that's not somewhere those people can look to understand culture. So that group that's working together needs to negotiate this shared culture that will have input from all of their different backgrounds. And what we see now in the world is that people from all over are communicating with people from all over in English. And these lines of communication don't go via the US or the UK. Most of the English that's used in the world is used among people who are 2nd language English users. And what that means is that English is a tool, and it doesn't carry any innate culture within it. Of course, if your learners are going to live and work in the US, then they need to learn some things about US culture. Similarly, if they're going to the UK or anywhere, you need to learn that stuff. But if you've got Chinese engineers who are communicating with German engineers in English, what they need to learn is not anything about any English national culture. They need to learn the skills of communicating across cultures. One final recommendation of a book, if you're interested in exploring these ideas further. My colleague on Voices, Chia Swan Chong, wrote an entire book called Successful International Communication. And it's a really good book. It's full of case studies and all kinds of useful cross-cultural information. Chia also wrote a lot of the cross-cultural communication work in the Voices series. So that's highly recommended. All right. So to develop cultural agility, we need to explore the role of culture in communication. How does it actually affect? What is culture and how does it affect the way we communicate? We need to help learners develop interpersonal and intercultural skills to deal with smooth communication. And also connected with that, understand the need to negotiate a shared culture in a situation where it isn't obvious which culture people are even communicating in, which national culture. All right, that wraps it up. I feel like that was almost a bit breathless, but the three assets in my suggested global communication toolkit are the authentic listening skills we spoke about at the beginning, engaging with accents, engaging with pronunciation for listening, developing a clear voice, which means taking ownership of English and using it as your own, embracing your own accent, and also focusing on not copying some other accent in a textbook, but working on the pronunciation skills that make you easy to understand. And then, as we've just spoken about, cultural agility, the skills that are necessary for communicating with people from all over the world in a language that is a second language to everyone in the group or most of the people in the group. I've already mentioned Voices, the course that we've just launched with National Geographic Learning. A lot of my examples came from there, and I think a lot of what I said gives you an idea of where we're coming from with this course. And from what I can tell so far, it's landing with people. I think we're doing some truly innovative things with pronunciation and culture in this course that you won't have seen in a course book before. We're quite proud of that. We've already done quite a few webinars and blog posts from my colleagues on Voices. I know Chia has done a couple. Marek Kichkowiak has done at least one, if not more. And you can, I believe, find those online and go back and look at them. So there are plenty of resources to explore these ideas further. And with that, I will wish you a big thank you for joining me here in New York in my office on this Wednesday afternoon here. And I am going to stop sharing my slides. And it's just me on the screen now, right? Or me and Lucy.
Yeah, it should be the both of us, I think.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Lewis. I would like to, we do have 5 minutes, so if anyone would like to ask any questions, do feel free. I don't think I've spotted any in the chat so far. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and Lewis can answer them in the time that we have left. I do have some information to share just on kind of follow-up information, because I've had a few questions on that as well, which I will share shortly. There was a nice comment in the chat there, Lewis. I don't know if you saw it.
Yeah, I just saw it. Goodbye. Thank you very
yeah.
much. I appreciate all the thank yous and the kind comments.
Yeah, lovely to hear your thank you messages and to hear how useful Lewis's session was. It's so nice within our Voices series, we've been able to share so many of the different elements of Voices. Like Lewis said, we've done aspects on pronunciation, on global communication. If you do, I'm going to share a URL in a minute, which you can view the recordings of the other sessions that we've done in the series if you didn't manage to catch all of them. There is a question here. I've just noticed it whizzed by in the chat. I'm just going to try and find it. Saying, do you have an example of negotiated shared culture?
Just sort of expanding on what I said before, that if you have an office where there's someone from Germany, someone from Spain, and someone from China all working together, and those people are communicating in English, each of them will have certain assumptions about sorry, I'm going to close my blind here, the sun has come out. Each of those people will have assumptions about politeness, about, you could say, when you go out for a meal, who should pay for the meal? In one culture, it might be the norm to divide the cost of the meal. In another culture, it might be the norm for the senior person in the group to pay for the meal. I know in Japan, when I worked there, the norm was for the older people to pay more and the younger people to pay less. And there was a long negotiation about, who paid how much. And so if you have a Japanese guy, a business person who's going out for a meal in a work context or a social context with a Spanish person and a German person, each of those people will have their own idea about what the polite thing to do about food is. And each of them may assume that their way of doing it is universal. What our learners need to realize is that your way of doing things is probably not universal. And so rather than being weirded out, rather than being completely confused about what's going on when it's time to pay for the meal, the negotiation would be to say, well, in my country, because I'm the older person here, I think, but I'm not sure, I would have to pay for the meal. And then the Dutch person might say, well, in my country, we always split the meal evenly. And that kind of simple negotiation is what I'm talking about, where you say, well, we're used to calling people by first names. In my country, everyone in the company goes by their first name. And the Japanese person would say, oh, that's interesting, because in my country, nobody uses their first names at work. And so people working on that team would have to decide, how do they address one another? So that would be a couple of examples. I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, good examples. There's lots of that question was from Pia, I believe. And yeah, lots of people sort of commenting on that, saying that it's important to not only know your own culture, but that of the people that you're with, and to show respect for that as well, which is very true. I'm just going to, just because we only have 1 minute left, I'm just going to share a few slides just so there's no confusion. I hope that is the right way round. Is that the right way round?
Yes.
So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to you, Lewis. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for everyone for being here. We're so grateful that we've been able to continue these sessions, even though we've not been properly able to get together in person yet. So that's really wonderful. As I said earlier, we will send Zoom will send an email tomorrow, and that will include a certificate for today's session, a recording of today's session, a lesson plan, which our senior academic consultant Alex Warren has put together for each of these sessions as sort of a giveaway, and also a survey, because we'd love to hear what you thought. It helps us tailor our future sessions to better suit what you would like to hear about. We are also, in that email, we will also send a link where you can request a sample copy of a student book from the Voices series if you'd like to trial that out in your class. As I said, do not worry if you miss the Zoom email. We will send one ourselves from National Geographic Learning, either the end of this week or at the very start of next week, after the bank holiday in the UK, which will have all of these links in again, and also that sample request link so that you can request your copy. I've had a couple of people say they've not received their sample yet. Don't worry, these can take a bit of time. We are experiencing some shipping delays at the moment, but I will follow up on that to make sure that they have been sent out. Just before we finish, our global team at National Geographic Learning organises monthly webinars to support you, whether you're teaching online, face-to-face, or a combination of both. You can visit our website, eltngl.com/webinars, to register and receive updates on these. I know that some of our Voices team have already done some of these global webinars, and the recordings are available to watch there. You can also see a link here to our InFocus blog for teachers of English. There's lots of free articles and downloads for you to use in your classroom. And of course, be sure to join our online community for teachers of English on our social media channels, which you can see at the bottom of the screen there on Facebook, where we offer up-to-date information on events, classroom tips, exciting real-world content, and lots of product information too. So do go and check us out. And just finally, before we finish, we are hosting our final webinar in this Voices series next month with Alex Warren, our senior academic consultant, and he will be giving a demo lesson on intercultural skills for the real world. So kind of using some of the materials that we've talked about and how that works directly in the classroom environment. So one not to miss. He is doing 2 sessions, both on the 11th of May. Lewis is also doing this session again on Friday. We've been running these sessions twice to cater for different time zones and regions. You can see the link at the bottom, or you can scan that QR code, which will take you to our Voices launch hub, where you can sign up for Lewis's webinar on Friday if you'd like to watch it again if you missed anything, or of course send it on to anyone that you think might enjoy it, and also to register for Alex's session next month. And as I said, if you missed any of the previous sessions, all of those recordings are hosted on that site as well. So do go and check it out and you can watch it. There's also a blog post from each of our speakers that you can download and read a bit of more information about their talk. I think that is everything. I'm just going to stop sharing so I can double check. Yeah, I can't see anything. So just to sum up, thank you again. Thank you very much, Lewis. It was wonderful to hear you present again. It's been a while. And thank you everyone for being with us today at the end of your day. And do join us on Friday if you'd like to watch it again, or send it on to anyone else. But if not, I hope to see you at another webinar soon, or maybe at something face-to-face, which would be nice.
Yeah, thanks everyone so much for being here. And I really appreciate the kind words in the chat. So thanks for your input as well.
Thank you, Lewis, and thank you very much, everyone, and see you again soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.